The Heat are looking to bounce back from a disappointing season, but which players will play the biggest part in making the upcoming season a successful one? We'll answer that on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg. I'm an editor of allyoucanheat.com here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more this summer. FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. For today's show, we're asking the question, who on the Heat is most responsible for the team's success next season? David, you and I ranked our 5 players who are most important to the Heat next season. We haven't seen each other's list going in. I think what we can do is we'll go off of yours, and then I'll just sort of tell you if I agree or disagree, and then we can kind of fill things in from there. But you came up with the idea, and so before we even jump into this, I'm kind of curious, like, why you thought about this as the topic for today's show, and what do you exactly mean by, like, you know, who can most help the Heat succeed next year?
Yeah, it's kind of a broad interpretation, I suppose, because I don't think there's any denying who are like the best players on the team. But yet, I still, when you look at the depth and breadth of this roster and who might wind up being potential contributors, when you're looking at who raises the team's ceiling or floor or whatever, I think you have to look at a broader number of players, more players that could contribute in a meaningful way to provide added context, because I think we've seen what this roster can do. Everybody's looking at this roster, and it's a very familiar one. Oh, they're a play-in tournament, kind of an 8th seed at best. It's the same roster, sleepy Pat, no changes to the roster, etc. And yet there are still, and at least in my opinion, and why I kind of thought of it this way, I think there are players that have the potential to make more of an impact than what you might expect them to, that you could still qualify this season as a successful one beyond whatever happens in the postseason. We know what is probably going to happen in the postseason. It's going to rely on a certain player to really take Miami as far as possible. And at the same time, when you're looking at the 82-game regular season, where this team ultimately has to make the most impact, because that can potentially save whatever postseason chances they may have, you're going to need other players to step in and kind of fill in the edges around there.
So not the top 5 players on the team. That's not what we're doing here, right? That not necessarily, although obviously some of the best players are going to have a lot to do with the team's success. But this is not going to be a ranking of the 5th best player to the 1st best player on the team. That is not what we're doing here. It's a little bit more nuanced, to your point.
At least I think so, yes.
Yeah, and then determining like what success is, right? To me, I'm looking at it as regular season success, because who knows what's going to happen in the playoffs, right? We don't. Like, the playoffs are the playoffs. It's a whole other animal, and it's a long time away from now. The regular season is not as far away, obviously, and the Heat need to have a better regular season. This is not a team that cracked some kind of code that realized the regular season doesn't matter. No, this team was teetering on the brink of disaster for 2 straight years in the play-in tournament. One year, they ended up using that as a launch pad for what became the most miraculous run in the history of the league to the 2023 finals. Not exactly repeatable, I would argue. And then obviously last year, they had their best player get hurt on a freak injury and missed the entire first round of the playoffs. So when you're talking about that's what you mean, like teetering on the brink of disaster here. It's either an important player can get injured, you can lose 2 straight games in a row. Next thing you know, you're home and you're not even in the playoffs anymore. Like, the Heat don't want to be in the play-in tournament. This is not a team that figured out the regular season doesn't matter or something like that. The regular season very much does matter, and it's very important that they have a much better regular season than they did this past season. So with that in mind, let's get into our rankings. We're going to go from 5 to number 1, 1 being the player that can most impact the team's success next year, most important, however we're going to phrase it. But who's number 5 on your list, David?
Can I get an honorable mention? And I feel like this player is worth mentioning and including there, because I think, again, maybe to add some additional nuance and context to this listing that we've got going, I think Nikola Jovic is my honorable mention because I think we've seen what he's capable of. Obviously, there's the potential for more. And yet at the same time, I'm not sure exactly what his role is going to be like next year because, well, you've got new players coming in. You've got, perhaps a different system, perhaps Bam sliding down positions. Who knows? We're not quite sure. But what Nico offers in terms of potential to me made him an honorable mention. But kind of skipping over that,
Hold on. I have Jovic at number 5. So we might as well just do the Jovic thing now because he was 5th on my list. So I guess if we did a top 6, he would have been 6th on your list. So it's not all that different. But he was 5th on my list because, the big question to me is the second year sort of mini leap that he took. Was that priming him for maybe a much bigger, more meaningful leap that he could take in year 3? Yeah. And we do see year 3 as being sort of the leap year for a lot of young players. And Nikola Jovic, maybe that's not going to be, maybe it might be year 4. He's especially young, right, when he entered the league. So who's to say? But he ended up emerging as Miami's starting power forward by the end of last year. But despite that, was still 11th on the team in minutes per game. So we've made this comparison before, but Eric Spoelstra mostly gave him the Luke Babbitt treatment for most of the year. Can he graduate from Luke Babbitt to meaningful minutes in the most important pockets of a basketball game? Can he close games for this team? Because I think when you look at the players who we know are going to close, I have 3 players who I know are going to close, basically, any given night, barring injury. Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, Tyler Herro. Eric Spoelstra is going to go with those guys to close pretty much every game because that's what he's done historically. Who are the other 2 guys? I think that's an open question. Maybe it's dependent on matchup. But if Nico at 6'10", shooting 40% from 3 last year, can become a more consistent shooter at a higher volume, can become mostly a more consistent defender, a better rebounder, just a guy who you trust in those moments, then with his skill set, he's kind of the ideal guy that you would have, right? Because he's got all those perimeter skills, and yet he has the size. So you don't have to choose between small ball or size or anything like that, but he's got to obviously take that next step. And if he can do that, then he becomes a guy who can close and I think makes a very important impact on the team next year. And he answers a lot of questions.
It's so weird because it almost feels like the bloom is off the rose a little bit after his up and down season where he wasn't playing at all. And then he wound up being a starter, almost like, there was a switch that was flipped and whatever Spo saw behind the scenes in terms of the work he put in and everything else like that. And he did well. Like, it's not like he did great. He didn't wind up blowing everybody away. But to your point, he didn't play a lot of minutes. He made some improvements. He showed some chops offensively, showed some ability to push the ball in transition and also to score from the outside. That's kind of what you're hoping for, but he needs to do it, again, to your point, more consistently and over longer stretches so that he can make a greater impact. And now people are kind of like out on him. And I don't know why. Maybe it's because he's already been on the roster for 2 years. It's kind of like, oh, well, we know what he can do. But I think there's more room for him to grow or to at least be more consistent and be more impactful in those opportunities that he will get. Who knows what those opportunities will be? Who knows where his spot in the rotation will be?
He's got to earn
it. He's got to earn it. But to the overall exercise that we're performing here, if he shows out, he can really help this team to a big degree, at least in our opinion. So I think
a couple of stats here that I want to get to with Nico before we move off of him. Again, it's all like we're talking about stuff in scale right now with Nikola Jovic, and the entire idea here is can he scale up and maintain some of these efficiency numbers? But important indicators that I think are meaningful for him. 3-point rate was 5th on the team per 36 minutes last year, and he was shooting it at a 40% clip. So the guy gets him up, exactly. His defensive rebounding rate was behind only Bam Adebayo, Kevin Love, and Thomas Bryant. So as a defensive rebounder, offensive rebounder, not much. But as a defensive rebounder, in terms of ending defensive possessions, that's going to be a really important stat for him going forward. And it was quite good. Again, it was behind the best
and indicative that he's a big on this team. That's how he's viewed, and he kind of played to that result. So,
and his true shooting percentage was ahead of Bam, Jaime Jaquez Jr., Tyler Herro, and Terry Rozier. And again, true shooting percentage, that's one of the least scalable type of numbers that exist because a lot of that has to do with your volume and your usage and what kind of shots you're getting. And he's mostly getting, catch and shoot attempts and things like that. But it does speak to his overall shot plot. In other words, how many times last year can you remember Nikola Jovic dribbling into a long 2-pointer? I can't recall once off the top of my head. It's mostly shots at the basket in transition and catch and shoot threes from the corner or above the break. And that's a great And that's all he ever has to be. By the way, if he could just be
Right.
Miami's souped up Lauri Markkanen, Michael Porter Jr. type, just a big guy with a big body who can make a ton of threes, and then obviously do a few other things on the floor.
He
That's a
can
great
put the
outcome
ball
for
down
him.
too.
Yeah,
I
of
think he
course.
can put.
He's a good
yeah,
passer.
So I mean, yeah. So I mean, we've talked about Nico. Like
Yep.
I just he's important, and it's worth mentioning him on this list. But
All right,
should
so
I
we're gonna
mention
get
my
to
number
your
5? Okay.
yes. We're gonna do it
Oh.
after the break. So we're gonna tease it. There we go.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Because you know what, there's a lot of things that people do, like if not every day, like regularly, because you just got to find a way to help you unwind. Who knows what it could be. There's a lot of different options. Maybe it's therapy. When you schedule all these activities for yourself or for your family, you've got all these projects at work. Maybe it's just easy to let those priorities slip, and sometimes you wind up not having the opportunity to kind of unwind. But it's important to make the time to help yourself. And when you feel like you have no time for yourself, then maybe it's time to include therapy to help you kind of unwind and stay focused on those things that are important to you. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, then maybe give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, really convenient. It's designed to be that way, and it's flexible and suited to your schedule. You just get matched up with a licensed therapist. You fill out a quick questionnaire, you get matched up, and before you know it, you're ready to talk to somebody and kind of help you get back on track with your daily life. So never skip therapy day, and make sure you use BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today, and you get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Who's number 5 on your list, David?
I've got Terry Rozier on my list at number 5. Because whatever role Terry plays, whether starting or coming off the bench, I think he raises Miami's floor, and he gives their depth, which I think a lot of people are still questioning because they're just a bunch of no names. They're a bunch of undrafted players. At least that's a reputation. I don't think that's the case anymore. When you think about what's happened over the last 2 years in free agency, Miami's undrafted, depth is basically gone. Caleb's in Philadelphia, Max is in Cleveland, and Gabe is in Los Angeles. That's their undrafted players. Now you've got Haywood Highsmith. Sure,
it's only Highsmith is the guy. Highsmith and Duncan. Yeah, that's it.
But you've also kind of added drafted players, and Pella Larson, a second rounder, Kel'el Ware, etc. Jaime Jaquez, Nico. That's your depth now. And so when you got Terry Rozier, well, guess what? He's probably going to be coming off the bench, whether that's the right decision or not. We can debate that.
I mean, he could start.
We can debate that. He can start or come off the bench. There's a lot of different options. But whatever his role is, I think he raises Miami's floor again. And at the same time, he kind of adds a well-known name to this kind of faceless amalgam of undrafted, unwanted players, etc. I think he's a well-established name. And you kind of forget the buzz. I won't go so far as to say hype, but you forget the buzz that came with his acquisition last year, because Terry Rozier, again, a guy who thrived in Boston. And you made this point in yesterday's episode. He's kind of been buried in Charlotte from a Nationals perspective. But now you've got Jimmy, you've got Bam, you've got the guys on this team that are well-known. And I think Terry Rozier ranks with those names as well. And I think he kind of helps Miami in terms of what they can achieve next season.
I have him at number 3 on my list.
That's
I think
high. That is really high, but I can see your point too.
He, after he found his footing, because it was a little rough at the start there, and he joined the Heat at the worst possible moment in the middle of one of the worst losing streaks the team has had in a decade and all these things. But after he found his footing, he averaged 19 points on 45% shooting, 42% on threes, a little bit over 4 assists, and that was all in his last 20 games before the neck injury. And he was really playing well. We all remember the game that against the Cavaliers, making step back threes at the end of that game, kind of giving that team that offensive spark that it needed to win that game. But to me, the thing that was most important with Rozier and why he's number 3 and so high on my list is because he does provide something that no other player on this team really provides, and that's just traditional pick and roll offense. And to me, the Heat are not a team that, if you look at all the synergy numbers and all these things, they are not a pick and roll team. This is not the Atlanta Hawks. This is not the Dallas Mavericks that are just running pick and roll after pick and roll. And I do think that's good, right? It's a little bit more unpredictable and things like that, things that Eric Spoelstra wants to be. But sometimes it's like, what's the difference between unpredictable and having no plan whatsoever? Like like if you're really efficient at something that's predictable, like Luka is with the Mavericks, well, I don't care if you know what's coming because it's going to work anyway. And for Terry Rozier, he was one of Miami's better pick and roll operators last year, and he specifically hashed out a chemistry with Bam Adebayo early on in getting Bam those lobs. Because the fewer mid-range attempts that Bam gets next year, the better. That's why the three-point shot is so important for him, but he needs to get shots on goal, at the rim, more often. And Tyler Herro wasn't really getting it there, done that way. Kyle Lowry, even when he was available, just wasn't putting enough pressure on the rim where he was creating those opportunities for Bam. And Jimmy Butler, who knows? It depends whether or not he wants to play basketball on any given night. So with Terry Rozier, I thought he really showed something. You know, he was getting those lobs to Bam and things like that. And if you could unlock Bam more efficiently in that way, that's so important for this offense. Plus, if you can have a pick and roll staple, something that you can fall back on. Again, this is not going to be a pick and roll offense, but if it's like the second or third thing on the menu, beyond Jimmy Butler isolation and post-ups, beyond Bam Adebayo doing what he's doing, if that's just what the basis of the second unit offense is, can Terry Rozier, whether or not he comes off the bench or not, however you stagger the minutes, can he just sort of be the anchor, the facilitator of that second unit offense instead of Tyler Herro, who should be playing off the ball more, instead of Jaime Jaquez Jr., who's going to be going into his second year, and that might be not unfair as an expectation for him. I think Terry Rozier has the ability to transform a lot of some of those in-between moments of the basketball game for the Heat where they tend to drag. And if he could juice those things, that's how you get your overall offensive efficiency up. So I think he's like wildly important to the success of the team next year. Plus, he's really, after playing just 31 games for Miami last year, the only new kind of additive piece that we don't know that much about. The Heat were 15-16 in games with Terry Rozier last year, basically 500. And it feels like that could go either way. You know what I mean?
Do you think my only problem with the ranking that high, and it's just I don't know what his role is going to be to the point where it'll be substantive enough so he can have that kind of an impact? Because again, I see him as being more of a floor raiser than a ceiling raiser. Because as important as his offense is going to be, and this isn't a knock on him, I don't know that they're going to find a right way to utilize him. And maybe I'm just kind of lumping Terry together with the Kyle Lowry experiment that did not work out as well as they would have wanted it to. And it's unfair, but I can see Terry being the player who's most likely to get a reduced role of all the other players that might be in question. Like we know Jimmy and Bam aren't going anywhere, but even when it comes to Tyler, I find that that's going to be more difficult to get him to accept a lower role. And so if you're going to have to minimize any player's role and thereby their larger impact on this roster, it feels like it's Terry just because of his limited. He's limited in terms of like his potential is mostly on the offensive end. I'm not saying he's a bad defender. I really like his defense overall, even though I think there can be a little bit more improved. But we've already seen what he's capable of. He's a guy who can provide that scoring, to your point. He's going to provide the basis of an offense. I just don't know that he's going to have a big enough role to justify the third overall. I can see him being important.
No, it's fair. That's fair. I guess my argument would be if he plays well enough that he deserves more of a role and a higher usage. Yeah,
that's fair.
You know what I mean? It's almost like kind of an X. I think you and I are kind of arguing the same side of the coin, right? Sure. Or it's different sides of the same coin, rather, where it's like, well, he's kind of a swing factor also. But that's why I had Terry Rozier number 3. But you had him number 5. So who'd you have at number 4?
At number 4, and this is a big leap for a first-year player, but I got Kel'el Ware. I think.
Wow.
I know he's probably not on your list at all, right?
Nope.
My feeling is that I know that you took time on Monday's episode of a mailbag to kind of address the Kel'el Ware factor, and I'm not saying he has to be a starter or anything like that, but just in terms of what the ceiling could look like. And I know some people are already kind of brushing it against the Derek Lively comparisons. I'm not even making that comparison necessarily. I just think he's going to add a dimension to this team that we have not seen. This isn't a direct one-on-one player comp. It's all of a sudden you've got a 7-footer on this roster that can shoot, that can attack the rim, that can block that shots in the painted area, that can do things that, quite frankly, nobody in this roster has been able to do since Hassan Whiteside, and that was it feels like an eternity ago. So you're adding something. You're adding the potential of what Whiteside could do, and you're adding it to this roster that has been, quite frankly, very successful over the last 5 seasons and has Jimmy Butler on the roster, not an older Dwayne Wade at the tail end of his career. You've got Jimmy Butler. You've got Bam in his prime. You've got Tyler in his prime. And you've got Kel'el Ware there. And I think he just adds something to this group that we haven't seen. And maybe that's how I'm kind of looking at this whole exercise, is like, what's going to differentiate this team in order to make them different than last year? And that's kind of how I'm going to quantify success too, because not just in terms of wins, losses, but just in doing things differently. It's not going to be copy and paste the way it has the last 3 seasons.
It's a great point. I have a stat that I want to get to with Kel'el Ware, and maybe you've got me rethinking my list here with this argument. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. We all love sports. We love them so much. We're listening to the show. We never want them to stop. You know, the Olympics have been great, but the playoffs are down now. You get fewer games, Major League Baseball, WNBA, etc. Not much else out there. The sports just not sportsing the way you want them to. But FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. And all you got to do is open the app and dream up whatever bets, whatever time you're in the mood for them. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers, new, old, whoever, with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com. Start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. If you're new to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can also follow us on your favorite podcast app. I have no problem with Kel'el Ware being this high on your list. I probably should have included him. I just have a hard time putting rookies on my list, which is why you knew that I didn't include him. But he can be tremendously important to this team. When Bam was off the court last year, the Heat had a defensive rating that would have equaled the 23rd ranked defense in the league last year. We know this over the last few years. The minutes behind Bam have been really tough. And this is my whole argument of Heat fans, can we just have nice things kind of thing, where if Kel'el Ware walks in and he's one of the best defensive backup centers in the league, that's a gift, especially considering where this team has been with Dwayne Dedmon, Cody Zeller, Thomas Bryant, Orlando Robinson, Omer Yurtseven, like all these guys that didn't pan out for one reason or the other. If you could find just an answer, even just for a rookie year, that's not to say that Ware will never start or that him and Bam won't play together and all these other things. Like, that to me is immaterial right now. But if you could just not lose those minutes to the degree that you were losing them before, then yeah, I think all of a sudden that could basically I'm talking about like with Rozier, those little middle parts of the game where you just got to be better. If you're better in those moments where Bam is off the floor and you're not losing all these minutes, and then you have to rely on your team to come back when Bam is back in the game. Like, all of that stuff is so transformative when you're talking about overall efficiency and your record and just winning 3 more games than you did last year, which would have gotten you 4th place in the Eastern Conference. So I have no problem with Ware being there, but like I said, I hate heaping those expectations on a rookie at this point and putting him as one of like the 5 most important players on the team. But that's just sort of a general stance, and I have no real like specific argument against yours. You know what I mean?
Who's your 4th player then? Who's on 4th on your list then?
Tyler Herro.
Ooh.
I have him at number 4. And so here's my thing.
Let's save that one then. Let's save that one.
You want to save it? All right, so go ahead. Go to your number 3.
Yeah, my number 3, I know you're probably going to have a huge difference with him, but I think it speaks more to how good he's been overall. I've got Jimmy Butler. And again, in terms of success for this season, I think it's a pipe dream to say we're going to get super duper engaged Jimmy. And I think it's also kind of misleading to indicate that he hasn't been damn good over the last 5 seasons. Like, I know it's all about level of engagement. I know it's also about, like, can he play 60-something games more than he has in the past? I don't know that we're going to – you can't predict injuries, and he can be as engaged as he wants to and still break down at some point because guess what? He's almost 35, and that's just what happens. I just think that even when he's out there, I don't know that he can always be a superstar. And again, I think there's just the idea that he's going to be able to switch it on or do something differently in the playoffs. But when it comes to doing something different, he doesn't really have to be all that different than what he's been over the last 5 years, which has been really damn good. Like we've debated this, and every season it's like, should Jimmy be on All-Star? It's like, yeah, he's kind of deserving, if not for the fact that he's hurt and that he doesn't want to be there anyway. Like he's already done with the All-Star accolades. He's been a fringe All-Star player every year that he hasn't made the All-Star team here in Miami, and that's been good enough. And it's just a matter of him being able to separate himself from that. It's like, I don't know that he's capable of it. I don't know that that leap is even possible because he has been good enough when he has played. I just don't know exactly how to qualify. He's damn good, and I don't know he's going to make a huge leap in order to make this team much more successful than it has been. But that's just my take.
He's number 1 on my list.
I know you're
straw that stirs the drink. And don't take my word for it. No, don't take my word for it. Take Pat Riley's word for it. Here's a direct quote. Here's a direct quote from Pat Riley. Who moves the needle most on our team is Jimmy. He's an incredible player. What I said at the beginning about change is he's got to give it some thought himself for this team to be what he wants it to be. End quote. That's right from Pat Riley. And I'm not telling you that Jimmy Butler has to be something he hasn't been in the regular season. He just has to be what he has been in the regular season, which he wasn't last regular season, if that makes sense. Let me just read you his usage rate. Beyond all the stats and the box score number, just usage rate. How many possessions is this guy using? That's what this measures. First year in Miami, 25.1%. Second year, 26.6. Next year, 26.5. The year following that, 25.6. Last year, 24%. The lowest during his Heat tenure. The worst regular season, easily, he's had in a Heat uniform. He just needs to get back to what he was doing a couple years ago. A
percentage point like that. Is that indicative of the fact that he's like kind of withdrawn from the offense?
It's almost 2 percentage points. It's almost 2 percentage points. But even last year's percentage usage rate at 24%, that's Klay Thompson, Miles Leonard. That's what that is. That's what their usage rates were.
Myers Leonard, 24%.
Klay Thompson. It's not a lot. But when you start getting 26% and up, now we're talking about Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, LeBron James, Jason Tatum.
So what's the ceiling? What's the ceiling for Jimmy's usage? If you're going to use usage as an indicator, okay. So you want to be slightly better at 26%? Like I think the offense is still egalitarian by nature. We've made this point. There's no point guard, and he's just not he's not the offensive engine. He's never going to be that.
He doesn't have to be Luka levels, right? Luka's at 31, 32%. And let's ignore the percentage because we can get kind of lost in the sauce with the numbers and how many percentage points off. I'm just telling you, he needs to be less Myers Leonard, Klay Thompson in the offense, where and we know what their roles are, right?
Deferring.
Not even just relying on other people to set him up, right? He needs to be the guy setting others up. That's all I care about. He doesn't need to score 30 points per game. I don't expect that from Jimmy Butler. He just needs to be the guy setting others up more often. And that could be differential, but he's the only advantage creator on this entire team. Tyler Herro is not an advantage creator. Bam Adebayo is not an advantage creator. Nobody's doubling those guys at the same rate that Jimmy Butler strikes fear on the opponent when he's in the post. He can get downhill, suck in a defense, and spray out for open threes. He's the only guy who can do it. You can't just ask, and even if it's egalitarian, it is. We're not asking him to be the center of the universe the way that, again, Luka Doncic is. But I'll also tell you this. In the 9 games that he had a 30% usage rating last year, the Heat went 8-1. It's a good basketball team when Jimmy Butler is playing like a star. He doesn't need to be playing like a top 5 player. He just needs to be playing like a top 15 player. And last year he played like the 30th best player in the league during the regular season. He wasn't very good. He wasn't nobody even talked about him for the All-Star game.
if there's going to be a stat that kind of backs up your point a little bit more than usage, I think it's assist rate, and that's where he's kind of took a step back last year. Like his first year was 28% at assist rate. His second year, 35%, and 26, 27 last year, 23. To me, that's more.
Yeah,
figure it out.
Same thing.
Here you go, Bam.
It's him.
Tyler,
you guys do
make your offense. Yeah, you guys do it. I've done it. You know what I did? I did it last year in the finals. You go. Figure it out. You guys are in your prime now. You're young. You're in your stars. That's where you go. And to my point, now I think that's why I have him at third, because we already know what Jimmy can do. And yes, he can.
But he has to do
that
it.
Needle. And yes, he can. But others have to also. Others have to also. Not just because we don't. I don't think we know that 100%. Well, my number 2 on my list is Bam.
All right, let's go. All right, so Bam. So
I
already know who's going to be number 1 on your list. All right.
Absolutely. And we might as well get to that. Again, I think Bam has to prove that he's capable of carrying this team, at least for stretches. Like not just an occasional quarter, not just an occasional game. Like you have to be able to start laying the foundation, especially because you've got a fan base that is so stuck with this idea that there's mediocrity in the past, mediocrity in the present, and probably mediocrity in the future. But at least you can provide some level of comfort that you can carry this team the way Dwayne did in 2008. Nobody knew what the next shoe was going to be and when it was going to drop. But you trade away Shaq. You had the taste of championship success for 2006. And guess what? You could still make a point. Well, hell, at least we've got Dwayne Wade. And Dwayne Wade's pretty good. No one's asking Bam to be Dwayne Wade MVP level in 2008 and 2009. But he still has to show something more. This isn't
what is it?
Making excuse.
I'm not even arguing with you. I'm just curious. Like, can I give you a stat here?
Yes.
Before you answer the question, because it'll set up your answer. List of players who averaged at least 19 points, 10 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 stocks, steals plus blocks, while shooting at least 50% overall. Joel Embiid, Giannis, Nikola Jokic, Anthony Davis, and Bam Adebayo. That's the list. That's the only group of those are the only players that have done that. Elite company. My thing is, I don't know what more you can ask Bam to do other than maybe score a little bit more, and maybe that's just virtue of swapping out some of those 2s for 3s. I don't know how much does that change it from 19, 20 points per game to 21, 22 points per game. I think on that list, only Giannis and Anthony Davis measure up defensively. Like they're the only guys that are on the same tier as Bam defensively. Offensively, I just think Bam is more limited than those guys, right? He's never going to be Joel Embiid or Giannis or Jokic offensively. It's just not going to happen. So, like, where does that next step?
In terms of Giannis, he doesn't have Giannis's just sheer athleticism
and size. Yeah.
And size. And AD has that size too. Yep. I don't know if it's shot attempts. I think that's kind of where the baseline has to be. He has to put up more shots. He has to look for
more shots or different shots.
Both, but I think more shots. Like, it has to be the start. Again, that's why I said the baseline. I think it's that. It's like, you know what? To our point from Jimmy, that discussion, hey, this is your team, right? You're the youngin' now, right? You're the one who wants to take this. You're the centerpiece. You're the captain. Like, I don't know, because I don't even think Jimmy would know, like, the clutter and jungle of his mind and inner voice and everything else. But I imagine that has to be some kind of a sticking point. It's like, oh, you're the captain of this team. They've been saying this for years now, ever since the Zach Lowe piece came out. I don't know when, that you're the foundation, you're the building block of Heat culture. I'm just a mercenary, right? I've been here for 5 years, and who knows? I might get traded at some point this season. I want my big contract. I've done everything I could, etc. But this is your team. Go out and earn it. Go out and get yours. Take those shots. Make it happen. I'm the biggest threat of this team. Yeah, I'll take that. But you can be at the same level by getting yours. So I think that's where it starts. Quality of shots, obviously you'd want them to be efficient. You want them to be more than just 18-footers. As nice as that is, setting up the potential for something.
Can't be everything.
You got to do something. Attack the rim, do whatever. I don't know if you're going to have to take a drop in your defensive metrics or something like that. But guess what? You're not winning Defensive Player of the Year anyway, as long as Victor Wembanyama's on the planet. So you might as well just focus on putting up those shots, big dog, because DPOY ain't going to happen. And who knows? I don't know. So to me, I think that's kind of where it starts when you're talking about Bam Adebayo. It's just having to take a leap offense.
So again, it's not that I disagree with you on this. I still have Bam as my number one. I still have Jimmy as my number one, but I have Bam at number two, right? And I think it's pretty clear that those are the top guys. So, and I think where you would see maybe Bam kind of taking more of a leadership role on offense. Again, I think asking him to score 25 points per game is just unrealistic. If he's scoring 25 points per game while finishing top 3 in Defensive Player of the Year, we're talking about one of the best 6 or 7 players in the NBA. I'm not saying he can't do it. I just think it's an unfair expectation of him at this point.
What if 22 would 22 be better? Like 22 points per
like 22,
game?
but I'm more interested in the usage rate, the assist rate, to your point before.
Like,
can Bam, like we were talking about before, how Miami doesn't run a pick and roll offense. The offense is based around kind of what Jimmy Butler does well. What if they were to recenter the offense around Bam more? Kind of the way it was in that bubble run, where it was a lot of dribble handoff stuff, and they had to get away from that for various reasons. It got really predictable and all these things, stuff that Spo has talked about. But what if you did find that real pick and roll partner with him? What if it was Terry Rozier? Or what if Tyler Herro becomes that guy? You know what I mean? Like whatever. Maybe Jimmy Butler becomes that guy. And now you're just running more of that pick and roll offense, and Bam's able to get those shots at the rim. We're so obsessed with these 3-point shots from Bam. Realistically, how many threes is he going to take a game? 1.5, 2 per game? I think that's probably realistic. Like, it's not going to be this crazy. He's not going to become a splash brother as much as LeBron goes viral for that comment. It's
an average 2.2 a game. Like, honestly, like
2-ish. Right. Yeah, 2-ish. And so
there'll be some games where he takes 3 and some games where he takes 1.
More shots at the rim is the key for Bam, because that efficiency has to go up. As good as he was last year and as much as he showed us offensively, lowest true shooting percentage of since his rookie year. Because you just can't take that many mid-range shots. It's you're upside down on the math on that when you're taking those long twos. So
5 years as a starter, and he averaged 11 field goal attempts in that first season as a starter. He averaged 14.3 last year. So like that's not enough. Like you're doing more. You're doing everything else. But guess what? This is your team. This is your offense. You got to go out there and prove it.
But but they have to be the right shots, to our point, not more mid-range shots. You're not going to be Michael Jordan out there. Yeah, don't try. You know, so it's all right. So number 1 on your list then.
I think it's pretty obvious now. I think the ultimate swing factor for this team is Tyler Herro. And that's probably going to piss off. I know that's going to piss a lot of people off. It's not even that, I
think most people agree with you.
Overvalues him. No, I don't think so. I think most people
expect them. People expect more out of Tyler Herro. They look at him as a ceiling raiser.
Yes. I don't think they do anymore. I think that's last season was that expectation, is that he was going to change things for the team this way. I think everybody now is kind of, and I'm sure there's still pockets all over the place. Pockets that hate him, pockets that love him. But I think the general vibe I get is that Tyler is he's been overvalued by this front office, and there's limited value in what he can do and how he can do it, and he's not going to get any better. So just trade his ass for a bag of chips. Do anything you can to get him off my roster. And I still think that's devaluing, kind of just being ignorant about what he can do. Like he cannot be a superstar. And I'm not even calling for him to be that. But in terms of just being better than what he was, I think that's certainly possible because of his youth and because that talent level is still there. I know there's limitations with what he can do physically, and he's never going to overcome that. But the talent is enough where I think he can get better. And if he can get better, then he raises Miami's ceiling higher than anybody else. Like I think you still have Jimmy, and you can't expect superstar Jimmy, playoff Jimmy, whatever you want to call him, for 82 games. That's not happening. Terry is good. Bam is good, but you know what you're getting from them. I think it's Tyler. He represents what the hell is going to happen on a nightly basis.
What does better look like for Tyler Herro?
I think it's more threes. I think it's more efficiency. I think it's better playmaking. And I think it also entails a slight improvement on defense, because we keep speaking to this and people keep saying that he's like a sieve on defense. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I think he's, again, limited physically. He's white. And the idea is like, oh, well, he can't defend for anything. It's like, well, I think he's improved. He's always going to get picked at. You're always going to have that player in the NBA who's like, oh, hell, man, this has happened since Larry Bird. It's like, you got the white boy on me? That pisses me off. I'm going to go at that dude. And guess what? When an NBA player goes at you, there's a good chance they're going to find a way to score, whether you're Jimmy Butler or Tyler Herro. and there's only so much Tyler can do with that kind of attitude. And so I think they're always going to find ways to attack him because he's Tyler Herro. And at the same time, I think he's still gotten better, especially as a help defender. And we've got to kind of accept that from him. So I think there's room for him to grow. And I think he's going to make that leap. And I don't think this is apologizing for him or making excuses for him. And at the same time, recognizing that if he doesn't take this leap, Miami's chances of being a better team, a more successful team, are kind of stuck. And they're kind of stuck to where they've been the last couple of seasons. And maybe that's directly correlated to his performances over those years. So I think there's room for him to grow. And if he grows commensurately, Miami's season will be as successful.
I have him number 4 on my list.
I know that's a huge gap, and you were seen as the Tyler apologist for the longest time.
I think what I'm about to say will back that up.
Okay.
I just look. I understand. To me, it's all about expectations, and I just don't like what player built like Tyler Herro, 6'5", 190 pounds, soaking wet, limited athleticism, is a number 1 option on a contending offense. The answer is 0. And it's never, like literally never has happened and never will happen. There's just inherent limitations that he cannot overcome. And by the way, everybody will, and I've brought that up before, and people are like, well, he says he could be a great scorer and he should be in the same conversation as Luka and Trae Young. What else is he supposed to say?
Yeah.
What is he supposed to hold? He's supposed to hold himself to a lower standard? I really want to be the next Mike Miller. That's what he's supposed to say? No. He's gonna say what he's gonna say. It has nothing to do with anything. To me, and I know it's been reported, he could be the next Devin Booker and all these things. Devin Booker is bigger and stronger and more athletic than Tyler Herro ever was and will be. It's a different thing. Just because they look similar doesn't mean that they are the same. So I think for all the hand-wringing around Tyler Herro and his whole thing, the guy is still a 20-point-per-game scorer, an elite three-point shooter who shot 40% from three-point range last year, does a lot of things really well, has been nudging his game more into the efficient directions that we want him to nudge it into, even though it's been slow and slower than even I have wanted him to, right? He still is guilty of taking too many long twos, but he's taking less of those, right? 81% of his three-pointers last year were assisted. That's a great number. That's a huge figure. That's up from 69% the year before. That is a huge leap there. More floaters than he ever has. He's not going to be a guy that gets fouled. He's not going to be a guy who gets to the rim. He just doesn't have that level of athleticism or size. So he has to have that float game. Well, he's taking more of those, and he's making them at a higher rate. I just think if you took a 20-point-per-game scorer and a top 1% in the league three-point shooter with the 14th pick in the draft, that's a great hit in the NBA draft. And so I just think that the whole thing around Tyler Herro has to be restarting our expectations with him. And if you think he's going to be the number one option on offense, you're always just going to be disappointed. But if you just let him be what he is, which I've already described, a dynamic offensive player who can help any offense in the NBA, but can't be relied on to carry any offense in the NBA, then I think everybody's going to be really happy and make some magical shots and do all these things when it matters and be one of the best clutch players in the league as he's been over the last few years, which somehow gets swept under the rug all the time with him. I just think that we could just let him be who he is. And he does, admittedly. I think I have him on my list because as he keeps tilting his game in that more efficient direction, be more Klay Thompson, less CJ McCollum, then I think he does help the team. And he does need to get better in terms of hashing out chemistry with all these other guys. But to me, it's like, why I have Jimmy Butler number 1 on my list is if he's doing Jimmy Butler things, then Tyler Herro doesn't have to do Jimmy Butler things. Tyler Herro could just do Tyler Herro things, which Tyler Herro is really good at doing the Tyler Herro things. And he's not very good, as we saw in that Boston Celtics series, as if anybody needed some kind of reminder of this. That he's not a guy who can lead your offense against a championship-winning defense. And people were surprised by that. And I still don't understand why. So I have him on my list, but I just don't have him at number 1 because I just don't think it's a fair expectation of him.
This is what debate's all about. I'm sure we'll get a lot of feedback on both sides of this. In terms of making this team different than what they've been, and I in my notes I've got this. It's not realistic, but at the same time, if you're looking at a player who can take the leap that is going to make this team better than what they've been, to me, I think ultimately it's Tyler, because we already know what Jimmy is like. He's such an established player and who he is and what he's capable of. And I don't know that we're going to get superstar version of him. Maybe we should. We can argue that forever. I just also don't know if Bam is going to be able to take that huge leap. I think he's capable of, and I think he should. But we're not asking in terms of my opinion. At least when I kind of conceived this idea, it wasn't just like, whether or not these players should be more important. I think it's just in actual realistic terms of what these players can bring if they are better versions of themselves. That's where Miami's success is ultimately more tied to than whether they should or not. Like, yeah, Jimmy should be an all-star hands down every year because he's that good. Bam should be the best player on the planet given what he can do defensively and everything else, especially if he can up his offensive output. Tyler can at least be a guy who should be in the all-star conversation. Like, we haven't gotten away from, 3 years ago, the buzz about him in that second year, as overhyped as it was, and I think, a lot of it, again, is the scowl. I think a lot of it is the fact that he is who he is. And it was just hard to kind of accept that player at face value, given what the NBA is. And it's just, it makes it he's unpalatable for a lot of fans around the league. I remember just random people, like NBA media members, saying Tyler Herro has the most punchable face in the league. And I think that's kind of, it's just at the same time, like there were people in the Heat front office and personal trainers, and it's like that they view him as a potential all-star and multi-time all-star.
But where do you
I
think
didn't disagree with it at the time.
But at the time, like we have more data, we have more now, we have learned more. And this is sort of my point, is what should the expectation realistically be of him now that we've spent 5 years with this guy? Is it even an all-star? I would argue no. I would argue
I think he can.
Okay, but like, is that the realistic expectation that you have of him now?
Yes, I still think that there's, over the course of his career, I think he'll make an all-star team. I think he's 24, and this offense has been ugly. And yeah, he's contributed to it, but between Jimmy doing Jimmy things and Bam doing Bam things, and the fact that the talent level across the board hasn't been that high, I think it's been a really ugly offense over the last couple of seasons. And Tyler certainly has contributed to that. But I think given what he's capable of, and there's those moments where you're like, God damn, Tyler, like, we sit next to each other in media row. Like, we know Tyler is just pound the hell out of the ball, over dribble. But then every once in a while, he takes those shots where you and I look at each other and be like, damn, that's Tyler. Like, why can't he do that all the time? Because that potential is there, and it's so tantalizing that I still think that ceiling is all-star level.
This is the part where you and I do agree, where if he's the guy, if he were to just play like Duncan Robinson, he would be a way more efficient, valuable, value-add type of player to Miami's offense, which is very much Bam and Jimmy Butler settling for mid-range jumpers, right? And you can't have three guys. Duncan Robinson came on this program and told us, the only reason I don't take mid-range jumpers, I know I can make them, I don't take them because we have enough people who do that already. And if Tyler Herro had that same mindset where he's like, 2 is enough for the mid-range jumper stuff, let me just take all these threes. Klay Thompson made 5 all-star games doing basically that, right? And I think Tyler Herro, he's a Hall of Famer. Tyler Herro won't be what Klay was defensively at his prime, and he shouldn't be asked to do that. Like, they're very different physically, but I think Tyler Herro can be Klay Thompson offensively, right? Like, he might not get the resume, and I'm not saying any of that, but just in terms of being this off-ball, like, red alarm fire kind of, oh my God, how did we leave him open? He's coming off of a pin-down screen. 2 defenders go flying at him, creating space for everybody else on the floor. Tyler Herro can be that. I have no doubt about that. So if he were to kind of lean his game in that direction more than he has, then that's why he is on both of our lists. We could debate 1, 5, 4, whatever it is, but he's on both of our lists because there is that next level for him to get to. But asking him to be the number 1 option, like Damian Lillard was supposed to be, like Kevin Durant, all these guys that he was rumoredly in trade rumors for,
right?
That's unrealistic, right? And so I think you and I do agree, at least in terms of what that next level for him is and sort of the expectations for him. That'll do it for us today. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Let us know in the comment section who the 5 most important players to the Heat's success next season are to you. I'm sure everybody will agree with us. This won't inspire any kind of debate. Thanks for listening.
Oh.